Hi, Babblefish 5 here. It's a wonderful spring day in Texas and I'm out for a day hike. Today, we're going to make pemmican. We're going to make 3 different kinds of pemmican, and then I'll show you a tasty trail dish that you can make with your pemmican when you're out on the trail. On this episode of the Hungry Hammock Hanger. Pemmican is one of the original trail foods. It's been around for over 1,000 years. The Cree Indians are credited with inventing pemmican. Pemmican is nothing more than dehydrated meat that's been pounded into a powder and coated with a rendered animal fat or animal tallow. When made properly, pemmican will last for years without refrigeration. It's also a very dense food that's high in calories, so a lot of calories in a very small package, which makes pemmican ideal as a survival food and as a trail food. All right, let's get going on our first pemmican recipe. This is going to be a basic pemmican. It's just going to have some meat, animal tallow, and a few spices. Let's talk about meat. Traditionally, pemmican was made from buffalo, bear, and I've also seen recipes for using fish as well. For our recipe, we're going to use beef. So we need to talk about the cuts of beef that you need to buy. They need to be very lean cuts of meat. A top round is ideal, and London broil is ideal. Those are very lean cuts, and you want any fat that you get on those cuts, you're going to want to cut off. So also there's a ratio of about 5 pounds of beef to have 1 pound of dehydrated meat. So bear that in mind when you're buying that, depending on how much pemmican that you're going to want to make.
No matter what cut of meat that you get, make sure to trim off all the fat. Save that fat as well. You'll need it later on for making your beef tallow. Arrange your meat, and it's better to do this when it's really cold, almost half frozen. You want to cut off slices that are about 1/4 of an inch in width. Then cut it down into strips, and then go even further and cut it up into cubes. Once you have them into cubes, let them get to room temperature before you start dehydrating. Also, do not add any spices at all to this. Just cut the meat and dehydrate it. This is not the time to marinate anything or add spices. That kind of comes later on. Put the chunks of meat into your dehydrator and dehydrate it at 135 degrees for anywhere between 72 to 96 hours. You want this completely dry. Unlike jerky, you want jerky to be dry and kind of crackle. You want this to snap like a cracker, completely dry. Also, keep it at 135 degrees because the hotter you make this, the more it cooks out nutrients in the meat. And this makes for a very nutritious pemmican. And apologies on this, I didn't get a shot of what the meat looked like after it was dehydrated. Sorry about that. At this point, you can store your meat for a while you get everything else ready. No need to do anything else at this point.
Now that you've got your beef dehydrated, it's time for us to turn our attention to the tallow. For this, we're going to use beef. We need to get a bunch of beef fat. You can get those from usually your local butcher or your local Mega Mart. Go to the meat market and ask for scrap beef fat cuts, and they typically will sell them to you really cheap. I got mine for free from a butcher that I use all the time. He was just desperate to get rid of some beef fat, so I was able to take some off with his hands. You're going to want to use the same ratios you did when you bought your meat, about 5 pounds of fat for every 1 pound of rendered tallow. Resist the urge to go and buy a bucket of lard. That's pig's fat, and it does not work well in pemmican. It has a tendency to go rancid fairly quickly, and it just makes a very bad tasting pemmican. Just say no.
Just like with your meat, you're going to want to work with your beef fat while it's cold. Cut off any piece of meat that you see on your beef fat. You want to have just fat, no meat at all on this. You can crumple it up into small pieces or keep smaller pieces of the strips. Put it into a Dutch oven and put it into a 250-degree oven for about 12 hours. You don't want to go past 250 degrees. You want the fat hot enough to melt and for the water to evaporate, but not get so hot that it burns. After 12 hours in the oven, put a strainer and a paper towel inside a strainer and ladle your beef tallow into a pot. Make sure to be careful because this stuff is still hot and you need to do this while this is still really hot. Your beef tallow should be perfectly clear while it's hot. If it's cloudy or hazy, put it back in the oven for another 10 hours at 250 degrees. This is what your beef tallow should look like after it's been in the freezer for a while. It should either be perfectly white or have kind of a yellowish cream color to it. If it's an off gray, you're going to want to heat it up again to 250 degrees for about 12 hours and then refilter.
Now that we've got our tallow made, it's time to turn our attention to spices. You're going to want to use powdered spices. Nothing like leaf spices, things like sage, oregano. Stay away from those. You're going to want powdered spices and then nothing with any kind of water in it. For me, I like a lot of spices like garlic, chili powder, onion, things like that make my pemmican taste really good. Also, salt is a big deal too. I take typically about anywhere between a teaspoon to a tablespoon of salt per pound of dehydrated meat in my pemmican. That also increases the flavor of the pemmican. It gives it a depth. It also acts as a preservative as well. That extra salt in there will help ensure that the pemmican will last a bit longer than it normally would, which is long already. Now it's time to put the pemmican together. You're going to want to get equal amounts of pounded beef and animal tallow. And there's two ways to do that. You can either do it by volume, by measuring in a cup, or you can do it by weight if you have an electronic scale. I typically use a scale and do it by weight because that's the most accurate way to do it. If you don't have a scale, just do it by volume. A cup of this and a cup of the others on that, and that'll work just fine. It won't be quite as accurate as with the scale, but it'll work and you'll have really good pemmican.
Take your dehydrated meat and put it into a food processor or a blender. Blend it for a very long time until you have a fine powder. Now, if you like to have a few chunks, just blend it to where it's maybe like this and maybe have a few chunks inside it as well. Now it's time to add the spices. For me, it's a tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of chili powder, some granulated garlic, and a little paprika. Heat your beef tallow up to about 150 degrees, no more than 170. Mix your spices together in your pounded beef and then add an equal portion by volume or weight of your hot beef tallow. Then mix everything together until you have something that looks a bit like fudge batter. And then package and let cool.
Now we're ready to do the second pemmican recipe. This one, we're going to add fruit to it. We're going to do the same process that we did before with the meat and the beef tallow. And then this time, we're adding fruit. We're going to need to dehydrate about 6 or 7 pounds of fruit for this one. Traditionally, the fruits were like berries and cranberries. Cranberries is probably the most traditional one, and we're going to put some in this as well. But I'm also going to put things like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and even some dark cherries. So we're going to need to dehydrate that. So let's show you how to do that.
I like to buy my fruit prepackaged and frozen. Keep it frozen because it's easier to work with. It's also the most economical way to get the fruit that you're going to need for this pemmican. Put your fruit into a food processor and give it a few pulses. You just want a kind of a rough chop on this one. You don't want to turn this into liquid. Put the fruit on the fruit roll trays in your dehydrator while it's still frozen. And dehydrate at 135 degrees for about 72 hours. You want your fruit to be completely dry. It'll always seem a little bit sticky because of the sugar, but you want it completely dry. For this recipe, I add a tablespoon of salt per pound of meat, a teaspoon of garlic powder, onion powder, and cayenne pepper. Put your fruit into a blender and give it a chop until it has a coarse chop to it. Mix your spices and your fruit into your meat and then add equal portions by volume or weight of hot beef tallow. Then just like before, you want to mix until you have a fudge-like batter consistency. Then package and let cool.
Alright, we're done with pemmican recipe number 2 and we're on to pemmican recipe number 3. This one's for people that cannot stomach the idea of eating beef tallow. For this one, we're going to use peanut butter instead of beef tallow. So let's show you how to make that one.
If you can find it, get some natural peanut butter. I like smooth and creamy, but if you want to get chunky, that works just as well. Put your peanut butter into a bowl and let it heat in a microwave for about 2 minutes. You want it hot but not boiling. Put a tablespoon of salt per pound of meat, and I put just about a teaspoon per pound of meat of cayenne pepper. I mix that together in with my fruit and my meat, and then mix in my peanut butter with that. Keep adding your peanut butter in small batches until your pemmican can actually hold a form like you see there. I can't really tell you how much it'll take. It just depends on the kind of peanut butter you get. Then package and let cool.
Alright, let's talk about shelf life for a moment. When packaged properly, without refrigeration, your pemmican will last about 7 years without refrigeration. Now if you take that pemmican and you package it right and you put it into a freezer, it's got an indefinite shelf life. I really don't know how long it's going to last in a freezer. The pemmican wit that you use with the peanut butter has got a much shorter lifespan on this. Unrefrigerated, you've probably got about 3 weeks on it before it starts to go bad on you, and that's because of the waters and stuff that's in the peanut butter. If you package it and you stick it into a freezer, you've probably got about 10, maybe 12 years of life on that before that starts to go bad. But even then, frozen, that peanut butter pemmican still lasts quite a while.
I package my pemmican by putting about a half a pound into a quart Ziploc bag. And then while the bag is still open, I press the pemmican down to where it's as flat as I can get it, and it almost fills the Ziploc bag. Then I close the Ziploc bag. This for me is the easiest way to package and carry my pemmican. It fits really well into a pack, and it makes it easier for me to get to it and break off pieces as I need it.
Let's talk a moment about calories in pemmican. The average pemmican serving is about 1 ounce. That's about the size of a golf ball. An ounce serving will give you about 400 calories and about 9 grams of fat and 13 grams of protein. So this is a very calorically dense food. So this is great when you're doing long walks on the trail. Also, bear in mind, you need to drink a lot of water when you're eating pemmican. Now that we've got all 3 of our pemmicans made, let's talk about how you can eat it. Normally, I just eat it raw. I take it and eat it out of the bag, which is typically how most people eat it. But there is another thing you can do with it. It's making a pemmican stew. The French Canadians used to make something called rhubarbe. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of it, but that's the only way I know how to pronounce it. And they would go, as they were going along, they would pick up things like onions and stuff that they knew were edible as they were walking along during the day, and then they would make a stew out of it. For this one, I'm going to make some stuff out of some dehydrated potatoes, corn, peas, a few other things that I've got that had been dehydrated and sitting around, and we're going to make a stew out of that. Let me show you how to do that.
Put your dehydrated vegetables into your pot and add about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of water over the top of your vegetables. I like mine a little bit soupy, so I put about 2 inches over. Let it sit for about 15 minutes to get a head start rehydrating. Then break off about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces of your pemmican. Use your basic pemmican or the pemmican with the beef tallow that has the fruit in it. Your basic pemmican works best for this one. The one with the peanut butter, well, just say no. Then bring your water to a boil and let it boil for about 5 minutes, stirring often. Then let your stew sit for about 3 or 4 minutes and finish rehydrating. Then add some spices if you'd like. Extra salt and extra cayenne pepper always works for me. And sit back and enjoy a surprisingly tasty stew.
So there you have it, 3 ways to make pemmican. Pemmican is a great trail food. Calorically dense, nutritious, and will keep you going on those really long hikes. If you like this recipe, please give me a positive rating. Your comments are always welcome. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you on the trail.